welcome to the December 21st, 2022 meeting of the Fitchburg Historical Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please be advised that FATV will be conducting an audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. At this time, I'd like to ask anyone in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves for the record now by standing and stating their name and address. Thank you. Hearing none. Proceeding on to, I'd like to have a roll call of the Historical Commission members who are present, maybe starting on my left. Megan?
Ellen DiGeronimo.
Megan Donahue.
Andy Lepasti.
Don Ostrowski.
Thank you. And joining us remotely is Charles Sterno-Amolo. Hi, Charles.
Hi.
And maybe joining us shortly is Sam Blair, who might be calling in. We have two members who were not present at the last portion of the hearing portion, or at our last meeting. And Charles, we would like you to join, but only if you have reviewed the past recording of the past meeting and reviewed the evidence that was presented at that time. Can you make a statement if you have or have not? You're muted, maybe?
Sorry about that. Yes, I went to the FATV website and watched the video playback of the, I believe it was November 29th meeting.
Okay, thank you. And Don Ostrowski, the same thing. Have you viewed and reviewed the last proceedings?
Yes, I have viewed the video and looked at the accompanying evidence.
To the applicant, are you in agreement that we could allow these two members to join in the decision making here? The more that's involved in it, I think it's appropriate, and they've been involved in the past with it and weren't able to make the meeting because of the date, et cetera. So thank you very much. So we have a quorum and members present, and what I would like to do as we're kind of moving to continue the hearing for the, let me just get on the record, continue the public hearing for the Fitchburg Public Libraries. This is the City of Fitchburg Library Board of Trustees. Their application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Monument Park Local Historic District as for proposed partial demolition, renovations, and expansions to their facility at 610 Main Street, Fitchburg, Massachusetts. What I would like to do, just to give an opportunity, if there's, I'm going to give additional opportunities for any public statements from those present here or joining us remotely. If you would like to make a brief statement at this point, and I will ask again before we close the hearing today or continue the hearing as it be for additional public comment now. So I don't know if there's any statements at this time, and there'll be another opportunity before we close. Hearing none. I'd turn it over to the library and your representatives to continue your presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for having us today. My name is Anthony DeLuzio. I'm with Collier's Project Leaders, representing the library as the owner's project manager. At our your last meeting, there were several items raised, and you were looking for support and documentation as to how we came to the design considerations that were being presented before you. I reference a letter issued by Jeffrey Hoover, who you'll hear from shortly, to the Historic Commission dated 12/19. That letter surmises the decision-making process that started back in 2016 when this project was initiated. We had to do very early planning, schematic design, move through the Library Commission process in that development, meeting their criteria to be eligible for their grant process and to get into that cycle. It was several years delayed in funding to get here, but we are here today looking for your approval to move forward. The document, as I stated on the 19th, supports the design decisions that have been made. We have taken some of your other information and your requests into further consideration, and I'll let Jeff Hoover from TAPE walk you through a couple of new drawings that have been made since we last met, and some of the design intent that went behind that, being very respectful of the historic considerations of the existing facility and trying to update and move that building forward for the next 30 years. As you can imagine, is a challenge as always. But thank you for having us. And if there's nothing else, I would suggest turning it over to Jeffrey Hoover from TAPE.
Thank you, Anthony. Jeff, you would like to continue?
Sure. Thank you very much, Keith, and members of the commission. I have a couple of images to share that will illustrate some additional development that we have made in response to issues raised by the commission. And I'll just go ahead and share that now. Presumably you can see a picture of the old Wallace Library building on your screen. Just to continue where we were and follow up on some of the points, beginning with the overall layout of the building on site is, of course, the existing image of the overall sort of library complex. And what I wanted to bring into context here was the adjacent buildings, which previously weren't represented in our drawings, and that would be the Fay Club on the left and Lucy's Barn below. And here is an overlay of the proposed design, just illustrating its proximity and context relative to those two buildings. In addition to this, two-dimensional drawing with a satellite image on it, we have a couple of perspective views. These two we saw previously. It shows the northwest corner of the library with the existing condition represented in the image above and the proposed represented in the image below, showing the removal of the bookmobile garage. Of course, the library no longer has a bookmobile, so that's an obsolete purpose for the library operations. So that piece is being removed. But there was a particular question regarding the relationship of the proposed design to those two adjacent buildings, contributing buildings in the historic district. So this is an image sort of that begins to show them in context with the existing. Of course, the garage is blocking our view pretty much of Lucy's Barn, but you can see an arched opening, the roof, a little oculus window, and a couple other features of the barn to the rear there. And of course, we can see a large part of the Fay Club to the right. This next image will show removing the bookmobile garage and what that view will look like going forward. And this is it. So what we wanted to observe was the degree to which Lucy's Barn is obscured or not by the library addition, and also to study a little bit the materiality of the barn relative to the addition, which we can see sort of to the left of the two trees in the center of the image is new construction of the addition. And we see its proximity to Lucy's Barn, and our intent to do a compatible brick material that will resonate with sort of the palette of not only Lucy's Barn, but the Fay Club as well. One of the other concerns, recalling from the last time we were together, was vistas of the Fay Club and vistas from the Fay Club with the new development on the site, primarily being the parking area that we're proposing here. And one of the observations that I think is important is that the Fay Club Drive is elevated over the library drive. It is a couple feet higher. And so the vista there is more or less over the cars. And of course, it's also partially screened by the recently rebuilt brick wall. I recognize, of course, the bricks are piers, and in between there is fencing. But that acts as a kind of effective mitigation against sort of views of the cars that would be in this new public parking area on this side of the building. So our assessment was that the impact is negligible on the properties, both in terms of views of and from them, and that we're making every attempt to use materials that will resonate with the context and feel integrated into the district in this way. So that's our review of that piece. I have a couple more images to run through, and then of course we can go back to whatever topics you'd like to address. One other question that was raised was about signage, signage along Main Street. Here we see, of course, the existing condition above and the proposed design below once again. And we are proposing to remove the sort of the monument and display case that is at the Main Street entrance now, and put preserve the pieces of it and bring them indoors and display them in the gallery. And then put, really in response to the Historic Commission's suggestion, and put new signage along Main Street. And here we can see that signage in place. I just want to look first, though, to the left, to the where we see the addition behind the Wallace Building. We can see a little bit of a hint of signage over there as well. And that signage is actually the removed and reinstalled signage and display case that is currently there at the Youth Library. If I just enlarge that, this is the piece I'm talking about. And what we're intending to do is take inspiration from this these vertical panels and use it as sort of by inference, use it as design cues for what we propose to do for signage along Main Street. So different from what was there, is there now, that being preserved indoors going forward, and a new sign, again, taking inspiration from the signage at the Youth Building and put along Main Street. I should emphasize this is a concept that has not been as yet fully developed, but it is the design direction we tend to pursue going forward. What we wind up with for font and material may change, but this is, and even location may shift slightly, but this is the basic intent. A sign that would be perpendicular to the face of the building, not on the building, and also perpendicular to the path of travel driving on Main Street or walking on Main Street. So at a small distance, you would be able to readily discern what the building is and where the entrance point is, perhaps in a way that's more successful than with the monument that's there now, and in a way that is also sort of unobtrusive but still obvious. So that was a couple of our design responses to concerns that were raised. And with that, I can turn it back to you, Keith.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff, for clarifying some of those pieces in the design. Let me just take a look at your response to some of our questions. We did receive your December 19th letter to us in the library and your past workings with keeping or removing the 1950s or 1949 designed addition and auditorium pieces with rationale of issues with primarily the matching levels of what is the current youth library and corridor going to the auditorium space being at kind of a half level to the rest of the newer library building, and integrating it into, kind of paraphrasing your comments, integrating it into the design features as required for the expansion of the library was creating difficulty and problems of reuse and I believe additional expense that were not working well. And you have worked these, presented these to the State Library Commission that's reviewing your process also, and have cleared the process. Any questions from commission members on the issue of their proposed removal of the children's library and courtyard and auditorium space? These are major issues for removal of buildings in the local historic district, so I want to make sure that we have any additional discussion on this or questions?
Well, I'd just like to add, well, first of all, let me say that I was very impressed with Jeff's presentation on November 29th, very detailed, and I appreciate that. As the professional historian on the commission, one of my ongoing concerns in terms of Fitchburg in general is in terms of the layers of history, and how too often, in my opinion, the previous layer was wiped out to put in a new layer. Have in mind, for example, the Philbin post office, which wiped out a very historic hospital. I realize, of course, progress and so forth, but there should also be some attempt, I think, to acknowledge the previous layers, as it were. So one of the questions raised last time was what about the rationale for demolishing the youth library building, and which you've responded to. But I also wonder when the New Wallace building was put in, I don't know that there was very much effort to acknowledge its existence. It was like, we're going to tear it down and put in the New Wallace building. And I, again, from my historian's background, I'd like to see some way of acknowledging what was there before. It doesn't have to be into the design of the architecture, but some way that people will be aware. It was a wonderful picture that you showed of the old Wallace Library, and if there was some display or some place where some history of the what previously had been there could be made, I think that would be great, if that could be incorporated some way.
Response, Jeff, or library, or Tony?
I could lead off. There probably are other perspectives as well. I think there will be opportunity, certainly within the library expansion, to provide a space to recall the history of the youth library. Not only will, of course, the panels which tell the story of its construction and how it came to be, those granite panels will be in the new youth library, so to speak. But also there is intention to provide a digital display that would tell the story with a lot of images of the previous building or the history of the buildings on the site. Not only the youth library, but also the original Wallace Library that was removed. Together with that, of course, the library is a good archive and has a local history room, which would, I'm guessing, and I'll let the library speak to this, would be the repository for the non-digital content, the actual photographs that would be stored there together with narrative history of the building. So I think the architecture can accommodate some artifact and some imagery on permanent display, and then the other opportunities that the library can identify.
Deborah?
Thank you. Just to continue off of what Jeff was mentioning, we do have plans for the gallery to be a large nod to the architecture and history of this library. We'll have our Rodney Wallace portrait. If you all have seen that, it's currently in or it was in our fiction room. It is now being restored. The granite panels, along with many other photographs and nods to what we have seen this library transform from since 1950, and obviously since the early one too. He also mentioned the local history room. That will assuredly be an opportunity to display photos and artifacts that, again, highlight the history of our library and the history of our city. So.
Don, does that address some of your thoughts? Or?
Yes, and Ellen has something to say.
I don't want to get into a long discussion. However, you're all familiar with the H.M. Francis Stones. Well, the other day, we visited the Stones. They come from the Wallace building that used to house the Sentinel. And Sharon Bernard was able to join us. And so she was able to see one section that's fairly significant in size, but it has an R and a W. This is brownstone, and it's in perfect condition for considering how old it is. And I know that she planned, if she hasn't already told you about it, it's definitely significant in terms of Mr. Rodney Wallace's contributions, not just to that building, but to have built provided the first library for the city. So that might be, if you haven't seen it, that might be something that you could use maybe in the garden or someplace.
Can I just add something? Sure. We have discussed that with our lovely architect, Jeff, and we are going to pursue that. And I also forgot to mention, we're going to try to reincorporate different parts of the building as it currently is now, which I know you're aware of, but for example, the flagstone pavers in whatever capacity that is, and the stained glass window that is in the main Wallace building, and any other kind of memorial pieces of furnishings that we've collected over the years. So it's going to be a great effort to honor what we've seen in the past.
Thank you, thank you. Realizing that there can be a mass of things the size of stone, I believe the stained glass window you're referring to is the stained glass representation of the seal of the city that's in the upper clear story portion, which it will remain in that area. It was removed from the 1885 original Wallace Library building. An interesting thing I just learned this past week, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate here or not, from some students from Fitchburg State were doing some research on some history of their adopted community being here at Fitchburg State. And one of the topics that they were researching was on the Athenaeum, which was, in a lot of cities, had gatherings of learned and not so learned people that would come together to discuss topics of the day. And they also had started a brief or a bit of a lending library of books that probably the members contributed. And this collection, according to the students' research, was shortly after the current city hall next door to us here was built in 1852. And supposedly the Athenaeum group met at City Hall, and their collection of books were at City Hall. So maybe one of the first remnants of what the public library became. And they would lend these books, and I don't know if there could be any, if it's worthwhile or not, just kind of mentioning how far back. And you may know additional history of the library that could be included in this kind of timeline of evolution, and it will probably evolve again in the future after we're gone. So just a little sideline on that.
Yeah, I love that idea, and that is something we've also discussed. I'm not sure if it would be a permanent display or kind of a technology display, but we're very much interested in, and we already have created a timeline with pictures depicting the settings that we can kind of, again, show what we came from.
I think our intent, if we kind of vote in favor of currently as you're presenting it, that somehow this be in a prominent, kind of a permanent location. Obviously it can't take all of the display area because it certainly has other purposes in the gallery space. As your public meeting entrance, and it's part of the communication about public meetings is having that discussion space outside and seeing the displays and things also. But if it could be, and maybe we would be happy to be involved in the future just as a contributing comment, but we'd certainly be happy to work with you on it. So we're talking about essentially the proposal to remove the 1949 designed section, which we call the youth library and auditorium space. Is it any other comment? The library is proposing to have these removed, and we're discussing ways of making sure we kind of remember this. And as our historian noted, it would be good to have this in relatively permanent. And we know that you have the records already, and certainly have been able to keep all the old drawings of these past buildings that we were able to have the drawings and things, so that's great. But having it in some sort of a public view, so the heritage and evolution of our our buildings is kind of on display. So, any other comments, Andy or Don? And I think it started from the brownstone. It's a large piece, and where this could go, stumbling on it in the lobby space, perhaps other appropriate space. I know the courtyard is getting full of pieces also, but it certainly could be an outside piece as it was originally intended in some form. And just as a suggestion, as part of the city's heritage and how Rodney Wallace was certainly important to the 1968 and the 50s editions also. No, his father or grandfather?
Grandfather.
Grandfather did the youth library, and the grandson, representing the family, did the 68 version. Okay. In your December 19th communication, and maybe Andy, as our secretary, you could have the scanned piece attached to the minutes of this particular hearing also, as just a document for the public to reference in our permanent record.
So scan the December 19 letter.
Yes, yeah, it is in digital
Attach
format.
it to the
I think
minutes.
now. So just attaching it to the minutes might be as a reference piece and easy to get to. A next item that Jeff has addressed in his letter is exterior paving materials. The design team will study the incorporation of sidewalk material and pattern precedents already established in the Monument Park Historic District and aim to make the design of paving around the library compatible. So thank you very much for looking into that. Currently, brick pavers and kind of matching the material and things would be appropriate. Existing wood curtain wall system. Curtain wall system is the reference to large panes of glass and the supporting system that holds that glass in place. This is referring to on the Main Street current library. There's large sections of glass that have wood divider support, muntins and mullions, I guess we should call them, that hold the single pane glass in place. Your comment and proposal is a design team will include a pricing option referred to as an ad alternate for preservation of the wood component while replacing the glazing with insulated glass. Included in this option, any reconfigured curtain wall areas will be constructed of wood to match the existing. So an ad alternate would be, as this project would go to construction or for bidding, and for, correct me if I'm wrong, for budget reasons, it would be an option that the city could opt to accept the ad alternate to reglaze the existing wood framed glass system in the 1967-68 building. And any new areas of glass as proposed, and I think Jeff has a slide up here also, where this is the corner of Main Street and Newton Place, kind of pointing toward the entrance of the actual Monument Park, steps going up into the park. The library design team is proposing to change this that has, or currently it has brick panels in those center bays on the Newton Place and on the Main Street side, and adding additional glass in those areas to open up the views for participants in the library, and also to open up kind of visual welcoming, if you will, of the public to be able to see into the space, pretty much as a glass store window would be showing their retail items, and this is showing the activity of people using the library, or perhaps making it more welcome. It is a change, design change to the original historic building, and this is for members of the commission to comment on, or, so I'm kind of opening it up to commission any specific thoughts or on this proposal change to the existing building.
Well, if I may, it reminds me of the original, when we first talked several years ago with Sharon Bernard about the proposed renovations. There was a idea of putting in a cafe. And that since has been downgraded, let's say. But I think that area at street level would be a very good area to show people where people could be reading books and maybe have a little coffee maker or something that not exactly replicating a bookstore cafe, but the idea would be that people walking by would say, oh, this looks very interesting, this looks very welcoming. I see people here enjoying themselves. Maybe I should go in and use it. And I think the idea is to try to make the library as welcoming as possible. It's just an idea. I'm not proposing that be what is done, but that's what occurred to me.
Well, that idea really excites me, Dawn. I always hoped I'd live in downtown Fitchburg when I got to this age, and the library would be a destination for me, but a cup of coffee would have been very nice too. Anyway, but I really have thought of that. My thought when I saw this image was that now the library, of course, is modern and a different architectural style, but people in the library can see Monument Park, and maybe there's some way of helping people better understand that this is the center of Main Street. Certainly the Wallace family had a major role in changing that, and of course the street across the street is Wallace Way, and the steps going up to the high school is a continuation. So I get what I'm trying to say. I don't know how to say it in brevity, but it brings it all together. And the library really is now can be seen as a part of the historic district that's there. And I'm not sure how many people know that it exists as such. So just.
Yep. And I'm not sure how many people realize that there's a plaque up at the other end of Wallace Way saying this way was created by Rodney Wallace.
Yes, and this just to add one more thing, and I just wish that the brass railings that all the children going to Fitchburg High School held over the years, there was a center one and there was one on either side, were magnificent. And unfortunately, they were stolen. So it brings it just from my view, it just brings it all together.
So it's saying a positive change, kind of reflecting and just kind of saying off the record from the commission and not a requirement, but it would be an opportunity for this public building, the library, to have at some point noting perhaps either this local historic district or the National Register district that Monument Park represents and the various pieces in it, and maybe just a diagram or something. It could be a point, it's kind of reinforcing Ellen's thoughts as people are in the library, and maybe in one of those corner rooms is something that could be an educational piece about the gazing out on the history of the multiple buildings in the district and kind of their relationship. And again, this is not another display area or whatever, but that might be an appropriate location for something like that. And this could be temporary or ongoing or whatever, but again, not as a condition of
Can I say
what this commission is meeting about right now.
Can I say something, Keith? I want to, my opinion is that I think it beautifully marries the past look of the Wallace Building with the future and progress, and I think that was the original intent of of Rodney Wallace. I don't know too much history about the library or Mr. Wallace. What I do know is that he prophesized that there would be a change to the building in some way, maybe full demolition or partial demolition, and that's what is happening here. And I think what Jeff has done is respect the past greatly with the keeping the bones of the building, but moving into the future as well as with the curtain walls and the other aspects of the modern pieces. And it's exactly what Mr. Wallace predicted and wanted to. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay?
If I just could interject to identify what the functions behind the glass on each level are. On the lower level is the casual reading lounge, and on the upper level is the quiet reading room. So two different perspectives on reading, from quiet to activated, but we did see and discuss with the library the potential that these two rooms have to connect visitors to the library with their cultural context, meaning the diagonal view directly to Monument Park. And so that has been a part of the design thinking, and not to speak for the library for their intent here, but there is certainly potential within each of those rooms to incorporate some artifact or graphic that would identify the library's position in connection to the Monument Park Historic District.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on the corner glazing? One comment, and I'm on the proposed replacement with aluminum storefront glazing. I think I see that at the second floor level where there is a existing steel reinforcing for the curtain wall, wind bracing probably to help keep this in place, that in the proposed, it appears that there's a double storefront piece at that kind of floor level, which would probably be a kind of a 4-inch face to it versus 2-inch face in all of the other storefront areas. We kind of see it back behind us here in the legislative building where we have 2-inch dividers, then we have thicker pieces, I think. Is that true, Jeff? And is there any way of, I'm not sure if that's going to,
Oh, I see.
It's kind of, in the original Coke design, they were all pretty much the same profile.
They were.
And it kind of thickens up at the second floor level. Maybe it's minor, but I just wanted to bring it up as a, accepting the, if it goes to the aluminum storefront version, is there a way of making them all the same width instead of doubling it at the second floor
Yeah,
area?
we can look into that. We have a preliminary detail that we've confirmed with one potential manufacturer of the aluminum storefront product. Of course, there are other manufacturers, and we will, as a publicly bid project, need to entertain products from at least 3 different manufacturers. So we don't know exactly at this moment how that would be detailed, but we do take it on as a design goal to keep the profile similar to what there is existing. There are, as you point out, places where there is steel plate and steel angle incorporated into the wood curtain wall system. And we're reusing all of that where we have, where we're replacing, and we're replicating that where we're building new, sort of, building on that same engineering concept that supports those windows. So I guess I would say that, we have our eye on that, and we're trying to develop details that will keep the sight lines and exterior profiles sort of minimized and comparable to the original. I think that the original overall sort of mullion profile is about 4 inches and has some tapering members that give a different impression, at its foremost representation. It's a little thinner. And so where we do have that double, we are currently anticipating fitting it out with some what they call jam extensions, which taper, so that it will slim down a bit as it comes farther forward. Again, trying to sort of represent the same design intent of the original design. So we have, we may not have gotten there yet with our detailing and product selection, but we definitely have that as a design consideration, or a design criteria, I should say.
Okay, and one other question, if it indeed does go to the aluminum storefront type of system, one of our members asked about what, color choices you and the library and construction budget might have on something like that. We don't necessarily always look at color, but this could be keeping it, similar to what the original design was, or if it was different, maybe what your thoughts and rationale would be, or how your approach would be to that.
Yeah, our intent is to pick colors that would have matched what would have been on the building when it opened, and maybe we need to do a little bit of investigation into, go through a couple layers of paint on the existing wood to determine if what we see now is what always has been. But our intent is to try and match that color. And as you know, Keith, there are more or less, I would say, there are white elements and black elements in terms of how the original design dealt with the window framing. The major components are all more or less white, and then where there were operable windows inserted, those were more or less black. And again, we're just sort of working with that basic design agenda to highlight mullions that are important, and to cause other mullions, secondary mullions, to have diminished importance in the design representation from outside.
And maybe in profile or something, if that's possible. Understanding that double glazing and new safety standards that probably the new glass for energy efficiency and safety glass requirements of today, that the new glass systems are much heavier than the current glass systems are and perhaps wind load requirements of today's construction versus 50 years ago are much different than today. So we're, if so endorsed by the commission, we would hope that you would look at all ways you can to diminish the presence of those extra mullions in the design. So. One other piece that, it's still kind of talking about elevations that, and to bring up, one other demolition is the bookmobile appendage that's in the original design on the west end of the Main Street elevation. I think we've kind of not discussed that in particular, but just any comments from commission members if this is a major demolition again. And
Could we see the slide again?
Jeff,
of that
could
area?
we see the comparison again on that northwest
Yes.
corner?
Yeah, and Keith, I just did want to add something.
This is Charles. Yep.
I just wanted to add that it's a contributing architectural element to the building, and I think that it loses something without it, and I was wondering what was explored to keep it and repurpose it. I realize that the days of the bookmobile are long gone, but I don't see why the space couldn't be reincorporated into something else. And if someone would comment on that, as well as the parking, trading that for parking, how necessary that is. I happen to live in that area and actually know that there's plenty of available parking in that area, so I don't know how desperately we need another parking lot, but anyway, if someone could just expand on that, I'd appreciate it. I do think it would be a loss to lose that element of the architecture.
Right, well, some of the constraints that piece has is, well, that is, of course, specifically configured for a purpose that no longer exists, as you know. But also, it is kind of an isolated pavilion, which presents interesting challenges to supervising the use of that space if it's public space. So there's a couple of things. It's also one more space at a different floor level than the rest of the library, and that has obviously that creates some difficulty for accessibility to get to that and from that space. So those are just some of the constraints that led us to remove that. And again, I guess I would ask, if the library has other observations about how that is currently configured, and their perspective on challenges for use. I pass the baton to them for any additional interjections on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Deb?
So the original plans predate me, so I wasn't a part of that conversation. But I only was about to say exactly what Jeff said. It's an unsupervised area that would require more staff in some ways unless we got very imaginative. And the accessibility of that room is not something that is currently possible. So would that require another elevator? And do we have the means to have another elevator in this building? That's where I'm at with that.
It also was an add-on. I remember that. It was, when the new library was built, bookmobiles weren't even thought about. You know, I'm trying to remember what grades my kids were when the bookmobile became, you know, a part of the library.
I can't tell you exactly the date, I don't have it written down in front of me, but yes, I think you're right.
Okay. Perhaps garage doors on the Main Street aren't one of the nicest things for Main Street. Any other comments from commission members on the bookmobile? Thank you, Charles.
I think knowing that it's an addition and later to the original building, and that it opens up the view to Lucy's Barn and a portion of, if coming down from the east to the west on Main Street, you can see the Fay Club a little bit. It brightens up the place. It actually highlights the history of the area that was a concern at the last meeting, of the proximity of Lucy's Barn and the Fay Club. I think for losing a piece of that, I think you're adding so much more in just the visual aspect of it.
Okay, other comments?
Yeah, well, back to Charles' comment about possibly repurposing it, that brings up another point that occurred to me is, now that we have Deborah here with Jeff, and they maybe can address this. Jeff in his previous presentation talked about the contemporary needs of the library. And as we know, libraries have undergone huge transformations. And just the Fitchburg Library, the area for DVDs, for example, or for audiobooks has expanded hugely. Going forward, what I'm wondering, what are the goals in terms of the needs of the library and what can be addressed with the current architectural changes? What does the library need more space for books, for example, or less space? Storage and so forth?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah. Libraries have transformed so much, you know, over the past century even. We need more space for programming and for collaboration. In this proposed project, we'll have, I believe it's 9 meeting rooms, group meeting rooms, along with tutor rooms for one-on-one learning. We'll have a community room where we can hold programs. Right now, the only program room that's pretty obvious to me is our garden room, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The auditorium is not up to par for current programming. The space that we need, yes, we'll bring our collections, and yes, our collection will always grow, but our collection always changes. They're acquired, and then when they're not relevant, they're taken out. What we're concentrating on now is creating a collaborative space for the residents of Fitchburg and all of the surrounding communities to come together and create. So, libraries are turning into people-centered institutions as opposed to collection-centered.
Yeah, that's a personal footnote to that. The part of the history of the Fitchburg Library is kind of, well, as a center for chess. So George Marajanian, once a month, first Saturday of the month, would have a session for all comers, especially children coming in to learn how to play chess. But he's also had informal tournaments there. But the garden room is one of the places that they've had these tournaments, but I just hope that in moving forward, there would be a space that could double as a place where from time to time, there could be people coming in to play chess. And as wanted to mention as part of that, few people know that Fitchburg has one of the largest chess clubs in the country. This is kind of astounding. North Central Massachusetts, far from Boston area, and it has a larger chess club than any place in New England, including Boston. And so as part, the Fitchburg Library has been kind of an addendum to that Wachusett Chess Club of Fitchburg. I'd like to see that, a space be available, used for other things ordinarily, but then also be available for people to come in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why in this proposed plan, we'll have a large community room that can hopefully be blocked off into 2 different community rooms for things such as this, drop-in. And we also have a meeting room and a conference room that are kind of larger places for people to come and go. We also have seating throughout the building. The number of seats throughout the building is guided by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, and it has increased our capacity by a great number that I can't tell you off the top of my head. But yes, that is the intent. And I also just want to note that I'm sure you all have already seen these photos, and I can make them available to you whenever, but there are photos taken at the opening of the 1950 Youth Library and the 1967 Wallace Library by Ezra Stoller, I believe his name is. And if you look at these photos, you'll see how much more room there is in the library. Room for chess playing, or room for knitting, or room for whatever program you want to do. Right. And if you compare these pictures to what we have now, there's almost no seating. There's almost no room. There isn't space for people to come in and do things such as chess club. We don't have the capacity because our collection's growing. And although we are no longer the regional library, so our collections aren't required to be so large as they were many, many years ago, it's still a library for a population of 40,000. We need to provide the materials that we can and be up to the public library standards. Mm-hmm. So not only do we need to care for the collection, but we also need to care for the people. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, and when the Johnsonia was torn down, the fire and then subsequent demolition of it, Fitchburg lost a huge resource because it was becoming that kind of center where people could they could come to hear a lecture, they could come to watch a movie, and then stick around afterwards for wine and cheese. I mean, it was it was exactly what downtown Fitchburg needed, and it's gone, and nothing has really replaced it.
And that's what libraries are transforming into. They're transforming into a combination of both collections and people, right?
Yes. I would love to see the library become that kind of center for downtown Fitchburg.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the library, having these spaces, it's an opportunity to welcome our community in, and I'm sure you all are very aware, but the library is one of the few destinations left that doesn't require a transaction to utilize it. You don't have to buy something. You don't have to pay any money. You can come in and use the library services that are free.
Get a library card.
And exist. And I think that's a really beautiful thing and something we need to respect, especially with the rich history of public libraries in New England.
Exactly.
Keith,
Yes, Ellen?
going along with Don's thinking, I think it was the late 70s, Fitchburg embarked on its first downtown study. And there were three recommendations. I won't get into them, but the third one really I found very intriguing. The consultants recommended that the city rezone all the upper stories of the buildings on Main Street because, you know, people's habits were changing, doctors were moving out of downtown, insurance companies, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I have always been intrigued by that, the fact that that actually could happen here. And my prayer and hope is that once people can see this huge investment in the center of the city, that it embraces a very important part of Main Street, they'll think of it differently, and that the owners of the buildings will be encouraged to create housing on the upper stories, and that the library can be a part of the city's advertising the value. You know, I mean, I am so excited. Please excuse me, but I'm not sure I ever thought I'd live long enough to see this to happen. But I can also tell you that, you know, I did direct the Salem Chamber of Commerce for 10 years, a few years back, and I witnessed, you know, property owners investing in apartments upstairs in their buildings, and people just flocked to Salem. And so this is very exciting.
Good endorsement.
Hey, Keith?
Yes, Andy?
I was just curious about the parking spaces there. Are these going to be public parking, library staff parking? Will the people be able to drive right through past the youth library and like exit on Boulder Drive? What's the enter and exit path on those spaces?
We need to be careful with parking. That's not our purview.
The planning board item, but I was just curious if we had a quick comment on it.
As just a correction, we have no restrictions on our particular charter as a historical commission, which can include ground improvements. We have in our guidelines that we have oversight of 4 or more parking spaces on a site. So just as a clarification, some cities, historical commissions have restrictions, and we have kind of a self-restriction on the number of spots. So, but anyhow, go ahead.
And also, Keith, the bookmobile building is slated to be removed, so I don't see how that's not in our purview.
Okay.
I wasn't,
I couldn't hear the last of your comment, Charles.
Oh, sorry. I just said that the bookmobile building is slated to be removed in order to create that parking, so I don't see how that's not in our purview.
oh no, I wasn't saying that. I didn't know, you know, where, I don't want to start any arguments or anything. I just wanted to, we cannot tell them how many parking spaces, except for, apparently we can. Usually that's a planning board.
Mainly a visual
Yeah.
interpretation
And
for the
directional
building. Yeah, we're not looking at requirements, but how parking might affect it. So this was, so maybe just, I don't know if you want to address it or not, if it's for public or private use or not, or.
Well, yeah, I could just answer the question as it was put. The intent is that parking to the west of the library is public parking. There is no drive-through. There's a significant change in grade at the back of the site. So as you go south along here, when you get to Lucy's Barn, the grade to the site down towards Boulder is, 8 feet lower. So there's no drive-through. So parking is created in the place that used to be the bookmobile garage. I don't think I'd characterize the process or the intent as being to remove the garage to create more parking. We were removing the garage because it was an obsolete accommodation in the architecture for the current functionality and difficult to repurpose. And then we wound up using it for more parking. So that just for that perspective. However, I would say that the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners is a little concerned in general about parking at libraries, or I would say they're focused on that as an agenda item for them to assure that they're not investing in architecture that is difficult to access. So parking is something they think about. I think that our particular site, being urban and also being adjacent to public parking areas, is not a particular concern. I think maybe as Charles pointed out earlier, that there's a lot of parking in this area in general. But the MBLC did ask for us to try and accommodate more parking convenient to entry points. So we did, put parking on Newton Place, as well as parking, in the place where the bookmobile garage had been, so that it's easy to get with a short walk to an entry point, and of course all the entry points are accessible.
Very good. And in your statement letter of the 19th, parking near the Fay Club, the design team will explore removing one space closest to Main Street as requested, because the Fay Club Drive is a couple feet higher and separated by a masonry retaining wall. We do not believe that the remaining proposed parking will have a discernible impact on views from the Fay Club. And that was a statement that Jeff and the library have put out. So that particular one was the one right, the first spot closest to Main Street. Maybe there could be, one less space instead of having a car right at the side view there. Of course, there's going to be cars along Newton Place, things like that. So, as a suggestion. And you said you're going to be looking into that, so.
Yeah, I think we'll just, in fact, do that. I think we can rearrange the parking without losing a space, and make it so that this first spot coming off of Main Street isn't actually proud of the face of the building, and move it back a few feet so that at least that much I feel confident that we will do.
And maybe just kind of backtracking to Charles' question about the removal of the bookmobile structure. Currently, that structure restricts that entrance to the back parking to a single lane. So people coming and going, there's only, it's almost like one-way traffic along that whole section there, which makes it difficult for particularly making it public accessible parking space. So I think what you're saying, that this additional parking is meant for library patrons and not just public shopping on Main Street type of thing is the intent of the parking, so.
Could be
That's
noted.
true.
Okay. And the next thing on your letter item was the building signage on Main Street, and I think you addressed that at the beginning of your presentation today. Any questions from the commission on their thoughts on creating something like a granite engraved sign on Main Street that's perpendicular to the building, so it could be seen from, if you're walking down Main Street, you would see the title of the library
Also
and from
driving.
cars. Jeff, in that thought, is this under the overhang, or is it out closer to the curb area, or what are your current thoughts on that signage?
Our current thought is that it's not under the overhang. It's out far enough that it wouldn't be. But that's something that we could study further, and probably may come up with in discussions with planning as well as we,
Yep.
sort of work within the right of way, perhaps on Main Street. Where, as I said, we just this is an initial concept, really, in reaction to the suggestion from the commission last time, and we have considerable latitude in our design thinking going forward about how to accomplish this.
Yeah. The question was asked in that we do want to know about signage on buildings. This looks like you're maybe removing it from it. We were just wondering if there was, how that would affect if there was signage on the building, and you're kind of removing it from it and trying to relate it to the existing.
Right.
new
Although I
place.
think I should interject that I don't think there's any, we're not removing any signage that's on the building, because I don't think the Wallace Building has any signage on it. It's just the monument that was subsequently placed in front of the building that has, that designates the building's purpose and name.
Okay. Your thoughts? Okay. Next item on your response was interior flagstone pavers. This is reference to kind of the main entry of the 67 building, particularly at the current checkout areas. There's a flagstone kind of wide strip that goes from the entry back to the, I don't know, maybe the back end of the 67 piece. And your response was that you're looking at an option of being able to retain but perhaps smooth the surface of this flagstone, perhaps, and if it's a desirable option, well, you'll try to see if it's an option you can save that feature of it in the inside, and leave that to your discretion. Proximity of addition to Lucy's Barn. I think in your initial part of today's presentation, you've shown representation. In distance, about how far away is the corner of the new addition to Lucy's Barn, would you say?
I would say it's 15 to 20 feet.
Okay. And your kind of comment of being sensitive to the material for that addition and in relationship to it. And I think, what are your current thoughts on that material for that addition?
Right. The addition is to be brick, and a sort of traditional terracotta colored brick, nothing unusual. And again, we just would look to sort of the palette of bricks, not only at Lucy's Barn off-site and the Fay Club off-site, but also to the sort of spectrum of bricks that are used currently on the existing buildings, and recognize those as precedent and draw inspiration from them as we select the final, color and variation in color and texture of the bricks on that part of the addition.
Okay.
We have made some preliminary, selections, but it is still, for those kind of fine level material distinctions, it's a little early in the design process. And again, as you know, we have to entertain different products from alternate manufacturers as part of the public bidding process. So there will be a final selection and approval of a product that gets submitted to us from the successful bidder for constructing the project, and we will look at those products that are proposed, again, with these design criteria in mind, and make a selection that tries to resonate and integrate with the context.
Okay. Any comments from Commission? Okay. I think the last item was the addition setback and proximity to Lucy's Barn, and you've just, I believe you addressed that, and also to its relationship to the Fay Club. Was this section visible from the, particularly the back addition, visible from Main Street from the Fay Club side? Does it have fascia panels? Are you reusing fascia panels at all on that addition, or is it just the Newton Place, the enamel paneled existing fascia panels?
Yes, it does have fascia panels on the piece you can see from Main Street as well. And these are the reclaimed, restored, and reinstalled fascia panels off of the youth library as it stands.
Okay. Any other thoughts? What was presented, or any questions, additional questions about the design proposal for the library? Commission members, any?
I feel that, you know, the issues that, you know, that were presented to the library participants have really been addressed very well, and it also allowed additional, comments and conversation during the process of reviewing them.
Okay, thank you. Others? Charles?
No, everything's been answered pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, Deb, you have a comment?
Is it public comment time? Is it okay?
One additional question that I have, and then certainly public comment time. Question we've had in the past, Jeff, is about, and again, this is maybe a little early in your design piece, but addressing the location of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning equipment, such as cooling towers or heat exchange equipment that quite often we can find on top of roofs or large ventilation pieces. This is a very skeletal, delicate building, and it's hard to locate these things on something like this. Have you, can you explain where, for heating and air conditioning and heat pumps and things, there's usually fans and heat transfer types of equipment that end up somewhere on the property. Can you give us a preliminary of where this equipment would be located? And is it visible, I guess, to the street?
Yeah, we have in the earlier presentation at the initial hearing, we did have views that showed the library from street level from many different angles. And even though we have built in our virtual model the rooftop equipment and placed it on the roof, you weren't able to see it in any of those views. So we, although again, of course, we have not yet had final sizing and specifications on these units, we anticipate they'll be approximately the sizes we're currently using. And currently they cannot be seen from the street. They're on high portions of roof and otherwise also obscured behind the monitor, the roof monitors that project up from the roof. So we're making, trying to be strategic about where we place them. And it does seem to be it isn't sort of, it doesn't seem to be a conflict with the design of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system to put them in these places that are naturally obscured by the roof forms. So it isn't an unusual challenge to try and make sure that these, won't be part of the visual experience of coming to the library. You shouldn't be able to see any of the rooftop equipment.
Okay. Perhaps doing better than, I think as you look from the Fay Club side and you look to the current early auditorium and pieces there, large pieces of ductwork and so forth in the existing section there that were either added on or part of the original design of a lot of exposed ductwork of ventilation and heating types of systems for the library. So, which certainly distract from it, and we appreciate your attempts of minimizing the effect of your design as you're moving forward on that. So, public comment period. And Deb, you would like to address?
We've reached the comment period, is that?
Yes, you can certainly go ahead.
Wonderful. I just wanted to recognize a quote that Megan alluded to earlier in this hearing. When the building was dedicated, the Wallace Building was dedicated in 1967, Mr. Wallace said, "My grandfather built the building, which in a way I helped demolish. Out of its dust has arisen this magnificent building to more fully meet the ever-increasing interest and demand for learning and knowledge. Someone in the future will one day tear down what we are dedicating today and build again a better library to meet the growth of our city and our expanding population." So I know we've talked at length about different aspects of this building, but I just wanted to highlight that both the Wallaces, all the Wallaces know and knew that more was to come.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other additional comment from people present here, people on Zoom?
Can I just speak, or do I need to be called on?
Sharon Bernard, please go
Sharon.
ahead.
Thank you. I'm Sharon Bernard, former library director. And one thing I did want to comment on, a couple of things. One, the Fay Club parking, just so people are aware, members of the Fay Club park along that fence. So in effect, their cars will be blocking the view of cars in our parking lot. And then one thing about the Athenaeum, if you go to the library's website on the About section, there is a library history, and there's a 1942 history that was written by the director at the time. I think his name was Simon Stewart. And there's a history of the library, and it talks about the Athenaeum and the two entities that came before, and then what happened after. And when they did move into City Hall as the first public library in 1859, they were in the back corner of the basement is where the library was. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. And the Athenaeum sold their collection to the library for $400. And then the Newton Place corner, we're really excited about opening up that second floor especially, because like the director's office on the second floor, that corner and the corner near the youth library are both dark at night. And the building's beauty is how it shines in the light. So having that corner open and not be a closed office will be a great thing. And just the iteration of the bookmobile, the office is great and the space certainly could be used for something, but Deb said it right, with the difference of floor level and supervision, it's really something I don't think could possibly, it's not we anymore, they could really use effectively. And one other thing, the first bookmobile was actually in 1953. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sharon, can I ask you a question? Is that permitted?
Go ahead, Charles.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Charles.
Was the bookmobile also designed by the same architect as the main library, or was that designed by someone else as an afterthought to match.
As far as I know, it's the same, but I don't know.
I was just curious. I understand your reasons for wanting to remove it. I'm not saying you can't. I just wanted to see what options might have been explored to possibly save it. Now that Main Street is a two-way street, when you're coming from City Hall going to Lower Main Street, I just like the way that part of the building complements the architecture.
But it'll be nice to have the building open to be able to see activity inside too, with the bookmobile garage blocks that now.
Yeah, you have a point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Sharon. Are any of those books that the library bought for $400, does the library still have any of them?
I think we have a couple. Before I left, we were working on a list of books, and I can't remember from what year they were, but I think they were from the original 1859 library, maybe 20 of them, not a whole lot.
I think it would be interesting to have a display of the books from the.
Well, that was the point of making the list and making sure that, see what we actually did have, to pull them out at some point and have them in their own kind of special collection of original books.
Okay.
So something to look forward to.
Very good. Any additional public comment? Okay. Hearing none. Commission members, any additional questions or information that you might desire before we close the hearing period and go into deliberation? Any other public comment? Hearing none, I would see if there's a motion to conclude the public hearing portion of this.
I move that we conclude the public hearing about the work that's going to be done with respect to the Fitchburg Public Library.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? I hereby close the public hearing portion of this meeting. Thank you all for all of the work and information you've provided us. As we mentioned in the beginning, it is, as you're well aware, a very complex and costly venture that the city is doing to improve this certainly valuable service and important historic structures in our local historic district. So thank you all for that. And thanks, Jeff, for your team's contributions to this. I know you've worked hard on it with the library and the architectural team there, so thank you. What?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Does anybody know what's going to happen to the little mice on the water fountain in the children's library?
The mice will be joining us at the newly updated building.
Thank you.
Thank you. The two mice happened to be on the water cooler in the entrance to the children's library section. I happen to know, or have known the artist of those, and terrific, fun pieces. And if it can be incorporated, and the delight of having that and all the other things in the library are certainly an important piece of it.
Keith, Sharon has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. We had to replace that water cooler at one point and remove the mice, so they were not installed anywhere for a while. So about 3 years ago, we had somebody, or just before COVID, we had somebody install a little shelf next to the water cooler, and the mice are sitting on it. So they'll have a home in the new place.
Awesome, that's good to hear.
Oh, Sharon, while you're there, as we look at the inventory, particularly the outside sculpture, the tensegrity, I think it's Tower of Light or something that it might be called. In Historic Resources, it's listed on the state archives. It's just, I think it says sculpture or something like that, and doesn't have a name for it, although I saw it in one of the library's pamphlets that it did have a name.
Yeah, it got named at some point down the road. I think people didn't like having it just be a sculpture. So they did give it a name, and I think Light Tower is correct. And Miho Ahara, who has a wonderful sculpture in Lowell that's just gorgeous, who was the architect. He lives in Concord, and he's still alive, as far as I know. He was. I wrote to him a few years ago about it. So he was excited it was still there, and we're still interested in it, and it'll stay approximately where it is, right, Jeff? I believe that's current location. It'll stay.
Yes, that's
If you
right.
could, if the library could send me the official name of it as you understand it, I could maybe have that transferred to the state's inventory record of that sculpture. So,
I'll work with Deb on that.
okay.
May I also just say that the mice are a prime example of how we're going to bring so many different parts of this older building along, as is the sculpture we're discussing right now. So it's very exciting.
Okay. So we have, as commission members, we can continue with our deliberation now, as we have it fresh in our mind. And looking for comments, support, denials, essentially getting back to what our
Responsibilities.
requirements are, that we have an application for certificate of appropriateness in the Monument Park Local Historic District that includes proposed partial demolitions, renovations and expansions of the facilities of 610 Main Street, Fitchburg, Mass. Discussion?
Well, I feel that the architect has carefully addressed the issues that, were highlighted at our last hearing, and that, I mean, I'm particularly pleased with the effort that they put in to address the issues that were raised. And I know that during the course of discussion, that some other issues were raised, like I don't know how to ask you, Keith, but the glass, well, the appearance of a retail,
The
the
storefront?
retail storefront, yes, excuse me. I'd like to ask you, because I honestly would not have I would not have thought of that. But are you satisfied that's going to be acceptable?
Any other comment on that? So, yeah. I think it is certainly can be, it's in the theme of, in many ways, and it may be a modern or a contemporary improvement on the design, perhaps, as some people may think that removing the bookmobile addition, or at least the garage door, and it's unused, piece may be in addition to it. So I think it can have a positive piece to it, and I personally would support that more glass toward the prominent Monument Park portion of the
Right,
building.
right, yes. Well, during the meeting, I was looking at the theater building across the way, and there, unfortunately, the original design hasn't continued, but there are 2 or 3 storefronts that have a very distinct, glass over what would be the door or the significant window. And if somebody would make a note that if we ever have an opportunity to talk about the theater building, that we will encourage them to continue that beautiful design, because there's a space that has covered the whole thing.
Yeah, and many of the 19th and early 20th century buildings were quite often before electricity and certainly the lighting as we know it today, that the main storefront windows and quite often the panel above them allowed additional light to penetrate deep into the retail space and provide working space,
Right.
visualness. And a lot of the windows in all of our older 19th century building were specifically for being able to see what you're doing, your work, your living, et cetera, and that was the source of light versus very dim, maybe gas in the later part of the 19th century, which is yellowish, dim, and probably smelled quite a bit because it was coal gas, generated right here in Fitchburg, or other lanterns and things like that, or the workday just kind of finished when you just couldn't have much light in the back of it. So maybe it was, so I think the same thing might happen with the library. As storefront windows do, it allows light to come in, but it also allows the outside to see what is happening, and seeing people inside and becomes more, or it can become more welcoming. So I think it's kind of a unique and perhaps a design feature that modifies the historic structure, but it is still in the same theme. So I personally would support that, I think.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Other thoughts? The issue, obviously, of demolition of major portions of the building, particularly to the rear, you feel as a sacrifice for the programming of the library's functions and community work being planned and encouraged by the state regulations on library construction, and with the perhaps caveat of documenting these the existence of these pieces. Any discussion by members of the commission on this is a major piece of removing buildings or elements certainly visible from the public way and replacing them with new buildings. This is a major piece before the commission.
I do feel that the library directors and the people who are in charge of that type of concerns have demonstrated, at least to me, that the children's library is never going to be forgotten, that their commitment to provide history and artifacts and pictures and whatever, I don't know how you plan to do that, but the joy of the first having the first children's library in the country, are the more than joy, the fact that it happened here. I know, I feel that you're going to ensure that no one forgets this, with attention to the historical details.
Other comments or additions?
I think I'll agree with Ellen's comments there, and also knowing that I believe the library team feels the youth library needs more space, more expansion, and the old design is maybe running out of space, and then as they demo and rebuild that library, they'll have new space, but also maintain some of the original design features, like the fascia panels and the youth library display area and rooms. So I would be for this new redesign of the youth library.
I hope you have a photograph of Mrs. Roosevelt. Okay.
I would agree with both Ellen and Andy. And by reading the response that Jeff put together, so thank you for that, by the way, it's very helpful. It seems like it's a dire necessity in terms of weatherization and heating, cooling, all that kind of good stuff that comes along with old buildings. And it seems like it can't be, it's past the part of no return with repair and things like that. So I think it's almost a necessity that they do this in terms of that aspect. And I mean, I always hate to see a building go, but I'm also for progress, and they have definitely taken the time and the sensitivity to carry on the legacy of the former, well, what may be the former building. So I agree.
Okay.
And I certainly agree with what Megan just said, the sensitivity of the architects and the former and the present director working together that's very impressive. As we stated, we would like some acknowledgement somewhere of what had come before, so that it's not completely lost to the residents of Fitchburg, who, as we've spoken many times at our commission meetings, may not be fully aware of this wonderful history that Fitchburg has had. And anything that we can do to keep that memory alive and continue to educate people about the history of Fitchburg and what has come before is something that we fully support.
I guess personally, as I've kind of exposed to contemporary architecture in my own background, and as I'm aging and seeing things in the past start to ring some significance of architectural pieces, just as in the 1950s we were covering up all the ornament and detail along Main Street that we could to make glass paneled and metal paneled pieces that we see on a lot of our storefronts in Fitchburg now, covering up those big windows and closing them in, and maybe some of the detailing on top of the buildings coming in. And kind of as in the 50s, we thought that these were old buildings and extinct and no more, did not have use or beauty. And today we look at them differently as time changes. And I feel, I kind of mourn for the loss of particularly the youth library in its distinctive 1940s contemporary design as kind of one of the, probably the only that I can recognize anyhow, the only intact pieces of 1940s contemporary architecture in the city that I'm kind of aware of that's pretty much intact. And the potential loss of that is I personally kind of mourn for that, and wish there were ways that could be incorporated as we would try to incorporate other details of buildings in the Monument Park Local Historic District, of retaining them and not removing them. So I think it is an important piece of our city's history. Understanding the library's mission and the library's role and the cost for the city and the taxpayers of the city of alternatives, I can understand that argument also. But I do believe it's important that we somehow recognize and understand the significance of these buildings that don't seem that old, but are part of our history. And perhaps we, in retrospect, would hope to have saved it if we could. So with that said, being able to document and have the drawings, the wonderful photographs that the library has and certainly has kept and as records of these things, it could be certainly an option to reconcile that along with budget issues and functionality of what the library needs to do for the community also. So that, those two pieces are unique in details. I guess the library, the auditorium, or the youth library, the auditorium, and perhaps the bookmobiles are certainly pieces of our past and in some ways relics of the past. So I could support if they are documented, and there is I think, as Don pointed out, that the history is somehow physically expressed and being able to see somehow in the library design of the future. So be that displays and documentation, and certainly the library does a wonderful job of retaining our history. So. And I believe proximity to Lucy's Barn was kind of a new piece that we weren't able to visualize in the past, and understanding the proximity of the new addition to the other buildings in the local historic district. Do we feel that this is appropriate measures are being done to in relative closeness to other buildings in the district? Any discussion, issues? Okay, it seems like the design team will be addressing those issues, and thanks for showing those additional drawings and for us to see. what, this being our, at least in our members' history, this is our first issuance of a certificate. The question is the certificate of appropriateness, the proper certificate of issuing, and if there were any conditions that we might want to attach with the granting of certificate of appropriateness. Maybe discussion on any conditions, or if that's I think it could be appropriate to have conditions with the approval of a certificate, or denial with the approval. Do we feel there should be any conditions, as this is a design development phase of the project, not the final drawings on it? Are there any conditions if we vote for a certificate of appropriateness that we would want to include? Issues we've discussed is the display of historic materials. Perhaps conditions of ad alternate for the window system as proposed in Jeff's letter. Let's see. I'm listing these in any discussion, if pro or con, if you want to state these. We have Jeff's presentations as kind of our record of what was presented, which is including his response letter of the 19th.
I think that would be very appropriate,
Okay.
because it really addresses everything that was really brought up of importance at our last meeting.
Okay, and I think what this becomes, this current discussed document becomes part of our proceedings along with the drawings and the PowerPoint presentations that they presented. So these become our pieces. So I would suggest if we propose a recommendation to approve a certificate, conditions would be historic documentation and display.
So,
And we can write this up for kind of a final editing.
right, but that encompasses, you know, what is, I guess, the background of our concerns, our concerns.
Yep.
Maybe to give progress reports throughout the timeline of their construction, abiding by these conditions that Jeff wrote out, or not conditions, but
Responses.
response, yes,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
And it could be in a form of written correspondence too.
I don't think this particular response talks about the kind of level of documentation that we've verbally kind of discussed, and then should we add that as a condition?
I'm sorry,
The recording of and display of historic timeline, including the buildings that are going to be, or the portions of the building that are going to be removed. display of this. Do we want to include that in a condition? It was kind of talked about, but not necessarily documented, except for
Yeah.
the stone panels in the front. were
Right.
documented.
I think that, that would be very appropriate to, it demonstrates that there was careful consideration and that there's been a very good response to the issues that we've, that the commission has raised.
Yep.
And
They do-
and
yeah.
that there, that some of the artifacts that we already know the library team recognized as being important to preserve.
Yeah, the ad alternate is in the document, as stated as something they're going to be doing, so that doesn't necessarily have to be a condition.
And I feel like they were going to do it anyway. It just seems like something that they were planning on.
Yeah.
doing. They were going to.
I think as a historical commission, it would be just good to highlight
course,
that
yeah.
as the future. But
But it's good to know that they
my
were
thought.
planning on doing it anyway.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Any other issues or changes to the presentations that we've had in discussions referring to the documents that they've presented that we would want to highlight in the conditions? No? Okay. Are we ready to vote on the issue? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the application for certificate of appropriateness in the Monument Park Local Historic District for proposed partial demolition, renovations, and expansions of the library's facility at 610 Main Street, Fitchburg, Massachusetts, as presented, and with the condition of highlighting documentation of, in particular, the historic structures that are being removed during this process, along with the history of the library. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A second? So moved and seconded, okay. Megan, then Ellen. All in favor?
Aye.
I'd like to take a personal votes on this, so just looking, I see Charles, your vote? Yes, okay. Megan,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
Don,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
and Keith, aye. I vote aye. So unanimous decision. I will prepare a draft of the certificate approval with the conditions and distribute amongst the staff here. Thank you all for, not staff, they are members. Thank you all for your presentation and your endurance with our process. We thank you all, and we will issue our certificate in the near future. Do I hear a motion? Our next meeting is the 20. January 26th, 3 p.m., back in the West Fitchburg Meeting Room of City
Okay.
Hall.
And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, happy holidays to everybody. Motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
I declare our meeting adjourned.